You check your account balance on a Tuesday morning and feel nothing. Not relief, not stress, just nothing. A few years ago, that same number would have changed your whole day. Something shifted, and most people never stop to ask what. Money doesn't just sit in your account and wait. It rewires the way you think, what you want, and why you want it. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly in ways that show up in your decisions before you even notice. There's a version of financial stress that makes people incredibly focused. Every dollar tracked, every subscription canceled, every meal planned. That kind of scarcity sharpens attention fast. It's not comfortable, but it's clarifying. Then something changes. Income goes up, debt goes down, the pressure lifts. And for a lot of people, that sharp focus disappears with the pressure. The thing that was driving them was fear, not intention. And fear is a very effective motivator until it isn't needed anymore. Psychologists call this the motivational crowding effect. When external pressure drives behavior, internal drive often weakens. It's not a character flaw, it's how reward systems in the brain actually work. The brain learns, do this, get relief, do this, avoid pain. And when the pain is gone, the doing becomes optional. This is why a lot of people get their finances in order and then slowly let them drift. Not because they stopped caring, because the signal that made them act disappeared. They solved the emergency, then the emergency stopped telling them what to do. There's another version of this that runs in the opposite direction. Some people, once they start earning more, don't feel better. They feel more behind. The reference point moves, the goalpost shifts. Last year's target is this year's floor. What used to feel like enough now feels like the minimum. This isn't weakness, it's a documented pattern, hedonic adaptation, lifestyle creep. The income rises, the spending adjusts, and the feeling of financial progress barely changes. Someone earning $40,000 imagines that 80 would solve everything. Someone at 80 starts thinking about 150. It doesn't mean they're ungrateful or irresponsible. It means the brain recalibrates to its new normal faster than you'd expect. And that recalibration has real consequences for saving behavior, for goal setting, for whether you feel like you're getting anywhere at all. One of the least discussed sides of this is what money does to risk appetite. Early on, when resources are tight, many people are actually more conservative. They can't afford to lose what little margin they have. Then, as stability grows, the tolerance for risk often grows with it. Which sounds fine, but it's not always calibrated to actual knowledge or skill. More money sometimes creates the feeling that you understand money better than you do. And that feeling has quietly caused a lot of expensive mistakes. It's not that more money makes people reckless by nature. It's that financial comfort can quietly reduce the friction that kept decisions careful. When losing $1,000 would have hurt badly, you thought twice. When it barely registers, the thinking gets shorter. That reduced friction isn't always bad, but it's worth knowing it's happening, because the same mental shift that makes you relaxed can also make you sloppy. There's a particular kind of person who talks about money constantly when they have less. Every conversation somehow finds its way back to cost, price, value, affordability. Then income grows, and money disappears from the conversation almost entirely. Not because they figured it out, because it stopped feeling urgent enough to track. And things you stop tracking tend to move in directions you don't choose. Subscriptions renew, rates adjust, balances drift. The monthly outflow quietly grows while attention is pointed somewhere else. Financial disengagement is one of those costs that doesn't show up as a single bad decision. It shows up as 100 small ones spread across months that nobody catches in time. The other shift worth understanding is what money does to time perception. When cash flow is tight, the near future feels very large. This week's grocery bill, next month's rent, the next paycheck, that's the whole frame. Long-term thinking becomes almost impossible because short-term survival is demanding. This isn't a mindset failure, it's bandwidth under pressure. Research on financial scarcity consistently shows it consumes cognitive space. The mental load of not having enough leaves less room for planning ahead, which creates a painful irony. The people who most need long-term financial thinking often have the least mental bandwidth available to do it. And the people with enough cushion to think long-term often don't feel the urgency. So the planning doesn't happen at either end, for completely different reasons. When some financial breathing room finally arrives, something interesting can open up. The future starts to feel real in a way it didn't before. Retirement stops being an abstract concept and starts feeling like an actual destination. Compound growth, time in market, tax-advantaged accounts. These ideas land differently. Not because the information changed, but because the emotional frame around it did. For a lot of people, financial literacy isn't the bottleneck. Access to information has never been the problem. The bottleneck is often internal. What state of mind you're in when the information arrives. Someone in survival mode reads the same article about index funds differently than someone who just paid off their last card and has 3 months of savings sitting there. Same words, completely different mental reception. This is why timing matters in financial behavior in ways that don't get discussed enough. The moment someone becomes ready to act is not always when the best advice reaches them, and the moment the best advice reaches them is not always when they're ready to act. There's a version of motivation that money can genuinely build over time, not the fear-driven kind that kicks in during an emergency. Something more durable, a sense of agency, of options, of not being backed into corners. When people describe what financial stability actually feels like, they rarely say rich. They say things like, "I didn't panic when the car broke down. I said no to that job without terror. I actually slept through the night." That's a different kind of motivation. Quieter, slower to build, much harder to manufacture. But here's what often gets missed in conversations about money and motivation. The rewiring doesn't always move in a useful direction on its own. Left unexamined, it tends to drift toward comfort, avoidance, and habit. The brain optimizes for what feels stable, not necessarily what's actually working. So financial progress without reflection can quietly stall in ways that are hard to see. You're technically doing better, the numbers are better, but the intentionality that got you there has slowly gone offline. And systems that run without attention eventually run without direction. One pattern that shows up often is what you might call the arrival trap. Someone hits a goal, pays off a card, builds a small emergency fund, gets a raise, and instead of setting the next marker, they exhale and stay there. Which makes complete sense. The relief is real. The milestone was hard-earned. But financially, staying in one place rarely means staying in one place. Inflation moves, costs adjust, life gets more expensive without asking permission. Standing still in personal finance usually means slowly losing ground. Not because of bad decisions, because of no decisions, which adds up the same way. The version of motivation that actually holds up over time looks less like urgency. It looks more like a slow, honest relationship with your own numbers. Not obsessive, not performative, just regular and clear-eyed. Knowing what's coming in, what's going out, what the gap is, and what it means. Most people who've built real financial stability don't describe it as exciting. They describe it as boring in the best possible way. Consistent transfers, dull accounts, predictable habits. Nothing dramatic, which is exactly what makes it work. The drama is usually a sign that something isn't working. The big emotional swings around money, the guilt, the relief, the avoidance cycles. Those tend to show up when the underlying structure is unstable or unclear. When the structure is solid, money becomes less emotionally loud. And that quiet is worth more than most financial content will ever admit. So the practical question isn't how to stay motivated about money forever. That framing sets you up to fail, because motivation is not a stable resource. It fluctuates with income, stress, life events, seasons, relationships, health. Expecting it to stay constant is like expecting your energy level to never change. The more useful question is, what does your financial system do when motivation is low? Because motivation will be low, regularly, for completely normal reasons. If the answer is everything falls apart, the system needs work, not the motivation. Automating what can be automated, simplifying what can be simplified. Not because it's trendy advice, but because it removes the human variability from the equation. The goal is a setup that doesn't require you to feel like it every single month. One last thing worth sitting with. Money changes what you think you want. Not always in obvious ways, sometimes it's subtle, slow, and worth watching carefully. The things that felt important when resources were tight sometimes look different with distance. And the things that actually matter to you, separate from pressure or status or habit, those are worth identifying before your income makes the decision for you. Check what's actually driving your financial behavior right now. Is it fear, habit, comparison, clarity, or something you'd actually choose if you stop to look?